This 2024 rookie class has a ton of top shelf wide receiver prospects, has a ton of depth. I wanted to know just how legit these top three wide receivers were. How good are the second tier of wide receivers, the Xavier Worthys, the Brian Thomas Jr.'s? How deep is this class? How good are the sleepers? I went to Mexico for 8 days and 7 nights a couple weeks back, and basically what I did most of that time that I was there was build the FSE prospect model with one goal in mind: make this year's wide receivers to target and avoid video as value-packed and as value-added to you guys as I possibly could. So I spent hundreds of hours on this video. I have never spent more time on one singular video than I did on this video today. So of course, if you guys enjoy, hammer the like button down below, subscribe if this is the first time you're checking out this channel, and of course, head on over to flockfantasy.com for all of our Dynasty and rookie content, our rookie draft guide, rookie rankings, Dynasty trade value chart, get your team reviewed over there, Dynasty decisions priority, all that good stuff. Link will be down below for that in the pinned comment, and this wide receiver prospect model will be live on the site this week as well. But without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so this is the unveiling of the all-anticipated FSE prospect model for the wide receiver position. I'm going to get into a lot of methodology of how I built the model to show you guys, full disclosure, my process, how I came to these conclusions. If, of course, you don't really care and you just want to know who are the wide receivers to target and avoid in this year's class, you can scroll ahead on the timestamps, but I really do encourage you to stick around for the whole thing because you'll get an idea of where I came to these conclusions and all that kind of stuff. So the real start to why I built this model in the first place is, number one, we had just such a great wide receiver class, but number two, our ultimate goal in Dynasty Fantasy Football rookie drafts is to hit on our prospects, is to hit on our rookie picks. And specifically, when we're talking about wide receivers, we want to draft productive fantasy assets that can fill out our flex spot, be our wide receiver 3, potentially be our wide receiver 2 or our wide receiver 1 for our Dynasty teams long term. And if Dynasty Fantasy Football were algebra, a wide receiver prospect model should be able to solve for the two things that matter most in Dynasty at wide receiver for me. Number one, of course, fantasy production, PPR points per game. The first couple of years of their career, we want these guys to be productive because in Dynasty, we don't hold players for 6-7 years. We hold players for 1, 2, 3 years at a time. And once they're Treylon Burks, they're not productive over the first 2 years of their career, we're starting to write them off on the open market. So we wanted to solve, of course, for PPR points per game because that is ultimately what we're playing here, Dynasty Fantasy Football. But the second thing that nobody really talks about with their prospect models is Dynasty value. And I measured that by peak keep trade cut value post year one of their career. So after their first year of their career, were they maintaining value from that point forward? Because we know traditionally in Dynasty Fantasy Football, tradability, open market value is very important in addition to whatever raw fantasy output you're getting. Because even though, for example, Garrett Wilson only has 12 point per game season so far, his best season career finish is wide receiver 30, he's valued as a top 6 wide receiver in Dynasty because he has shown on the field that he's a very, very productive receiver, that he's a very good receiver. He just hasn't crushed yet because of external factors like his quarterback play. But everybody who drafted Garrett Wilson back in 2022 knows that they hit on that draft pick. And right now, if you don't believe him long-term, you have a very good selling window knowing that you can trade him for like 95% of all wide receivers in Dynasty. I feel like nobody else factors in Dynasty value into their prospect models. So I wanted to do it given how popular Dynasty has gotten and how the market is a real thing that you can exploit. If you don't believe in a player, you can sell them high. If you do believe in a player, you can buy them low and all that kind of stuff. So in addition to raw fantasy point production, it also tested how predictive these wide receivers would be to peak inside the top 5 overall Dynasty wide receivers, or to peak as a wide receiver 1 in Dynasty or a wide receiver 2 or better in Dynasty. Because in theory, if you sell all these players at peak value, then that pick was a hit. And a good example of that would have been Elijah Moore a couple years ago. After his rookie season, he was valued inside the top 15 wide receivers in Dynasty. So if you didn't believe in him, or you thought he was overvalued, or you just wanted to sell him for production at that position, you could have sold him at his high point. And of course, he's since declined in value since then. So the other thing that I wanted to look at too, just to prove full disclosure to you guys, was this model actually predictive? Because if it wasn't, then there's no point of you even watching this video. And this model was in fact predictive, more predictive than the NFL draft itself, at predicting fantasy production with a correlation or an R-squared value of 39%. compared to draft capital in years 1 to 3 points per game with a correlation or R squared value of 33%. It also, like I said, the other factor we're testing was dynasty value. It beat draft capital by 8%, posting a 63% hit rate in the last 4 years since 2020, since Keep Trade Cut has been a thing, and then beating it 5% overall since 2016 using DLF prior to 2020 as the dynasty value measure there. So I know that might be confusing if you're not a math person, but the bottom line is, and I can simplify it here, all these numbers mean, this correlation, all this stuff, is that if you followed this model verbatim, you would have hit at a higher rate than the NFL. And a lot of people like to go to my comment section and call me an idiot and be like, you don't know better than the NFL. It's like, the numbers actually suggest that the model is better than the NFL at actually doing this, and it tells you which outlier swings to take. It tells you which guys that it likes in the first round wide receiver conversation. It tells you which guys to avoid, what guys are landmines that you don't want to draft the next Jalen Reagor or N'Keal Harry. So now that we've established that what we're looking for and that it's accurate, what exactly did I do to build this thing? Because I'm sure you guys are wondering, okay, what metrics did you use? All that kind of stuff. How the model works is this. I basically grade these guys on a scale of 100%. I factored in what I think is important for Dynasty Fantasy Football, as I've done through countless exercise over the years. The older wide receivers to target and avoid videos, I talked about what things were more predictive than others, and we determined in those videos that production overweights athleticism, and being a young player coming out is important, and all that kind of stuff. The final results were this. 40% of the model is made up of analytics thresholds, production measures, age and experience adjusted stuff, level of competition. Of course, it matters if you're playing in a Power 5 conference against good other cornerbacks and that kind of thing. And I also assigned bonuses to account for things like how good the receivers in their offense were, how good their quarterback was, as well as did they improve after posting their breakout season, which of course I talked about in last year's video. The landmine prospects like Laviska Shenault and Jalen Reagor and Rondale Moore, these guys peaked as freshmen or peaked as young players and never improved upon that. So analytics was 40% of that overall 100% grade. I also included traits, and I don't think a lot of people account for stuff like this. A lot of people will have, size and athleticism in their models, but I also included like in-game measurable things like yards after catch ability of 5%, 3-level ability and usage of 6%. So these are things like how good are they downfield? Were they a slot receiver? Were they not a slot receiver? Did they get most of their targets on screen passes, or were they primarily getting downfield targets? And I also accounted for things like hands and contested catch rate. So that, in addition to size and relative athletic score from MathBomb, encompass the 25% of their overall 100% grade. And then I also had film as a portion of their grade as well. And this might look confusing a little bit. I'll simplify it here. 35% of their total grade was attributed to film, and that accounted for things like draft capital of 20%, PFF receiving grade of 5%, because that's primarily a film-related thing. And then if I graded them, so prospects from 2021 to now, I gave them 10% on my own film grades, and if they were a prospect prior to that, because this model goes back to 2016, then I attributed 10% to PFF receiving grade, and I gave them an overall 30% film grade, and then just divided it by 30% over 35%, which essentially just balanced out the grades. But again, because I didn't grade all these prospects, I wasn't grading prospects in 2017, I can't use my own film grades for that, but I wanted to incorporate them for the new school prospects. So again, hopefully I'm not confusing anybody at this point in time, but essentially the model inputs are this: 40% analytics, 25% traits, 30 to 35% film-related stuff. But before I could actually grade these players, I needed to know how I was grading them, and that's where the trend lines came in. So based on the averages of the 46 wide receivers since 2016 that posted a wide receiver 2 or better PPR point per game season, or the 25 receivers that have posted a top 15 season, or the 49 receivers that have had their dynasty values peak inside the top 24 via Keep Trade Cut, I basically took the averages of all of those samples of players, and I determined a benchmark for each metric. So within the production measures bucket were things like target share, or yards per route run, or yards per team pass attempt, metrics that you guys are probably familiar with if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. I looked at all of those samples, right? Guys that were good value adds, guys that were actually good from a point per game perspective, and they all hovered, to give you guys an example, around a 25% target share on average. So then I use that benchmark, set the mark at 3% that you would achieve of your total production measures grade for best season target share per game. And if you hit that benchmark, you were at 2.5%. If you exceeded that benchmark, meaning you were above 30% target share in this example, you had all 3% to yourself. And then, if you had a 22% target share, you only got 2%. If you had a 20% target share, you only got 1.5%, so on and so forth. And I did this across like a number of different metrics for each bucket. That specific threshold, like I said, was worth 3% of their total grade under the production stats bucket. And to get all 3%, they needed to actually exceed the averages of the top guys in fantasy football. So that's just one example, but hopefully I'm making sense so far. I'm showing you guys the process here for full transparency. But again, at the end of the video, this should all make sense to you in terms of how it translated to the 2024 class. So to outline the whole process further, I'll just show you the two best performers in the model from start to finish, 2016 to 2023, and give you an idea of how all the metrics I used accounted for their weight and what the model spit out as a result of that. So let's start with the production metrics, which again was under the analytics bucket, which was 40% of their total grade. Production metrics equaled 21.5%. Ja'Marr Chase and CeeDee Lamb were the kings of this model prior to this year, which is kind of a bit of a spoiler alert, but career yards per route run, best season yards per route run, career targets per route run, best season target share per game, career first downs per route run, best season yards per team pass attempt, and best season PPR points per game. Those were the production metrics that went into the model, and you can see these guys obviously stack up very well outside of really targets per route run over their career and target share because they had other talented receivers on their teams with them. They basically crushed everything here. Then we get to age and level of competition metrics, right? Age was 12.5%, level of competition was 6%. Breakout age, year 1 to 3 receiving yards market share. So basically from the time they were a true freshman to their third season out of high school, how old were they on draft night? How many years out of high school were they coming out of school? Obviously early declare status, non-early declare status, that kind of thing. And then were they in a Power 5 conference, as well as what was their strength of schedule of the teams that they actually played against too, because that factors in terms of level of competition as well. And again, Ja'Marr Chase, CeeDee Lamb basically crushed these across the board, hence why they're some of the top prospects that we've seen since 2016. And then I also added in, like I said, these analytics multipliers. You could score anywhere from -2% to 2%, and I subjectively graded these based on what I saw from them in college. Again, I did not account for anything that they've done in the pros, just looking at their prospect profile specifically. I gave them a score of -2 to 2% on things like target competition. Obviously, Ja'Marr Chase competed with first-round receiver Justin Jefferson, so he obviously was in a place where he was competing with great NFL talent, and same goes for CeeDee Lamb, who was competing for targets with Marquise Brown and with Mark Andrews at tight end and stuff like that. So those guys got bonuses in that area. Of course, both of them played with elite quarterbacks. Ja'Marr Chase played with Joe Burrow. CeeDee Lamb played with Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. Like, obviously, all those guys were first overall picks for a reason. And then post-breakout age improvement bonus essentially just meant when they hit their breakout age metric, did they improve after that season? For Ja'Marr Chase, unfortunately, he did not improve because he sat out a year of college football, which is why he only got 0% there. But CeeDee Lamb, of course, broke out his freshman and sophomore year, and then his junior season continued to improve upon that production. So that's where those multipliers factored into the analytics grade. But again, that is something that I did on a subjective basis, looking at these prospect profiles. So it is not totally objective. You could definitely argue it one way or another, but I did it based on my best judgment. Then we move into the 25% traits measures with CeeDee Lamb and with Ja'Marr Chase. Height, weight, relative athletic score, and then I also gave players a bonus 1 or -1% if they reached the threshold, which was the average of the top 24 wide receiver seasons, which was 7.5 on the RAS metric. So if you reached an RAS score above 7.5, and CeeDee Lamb actually narrowly missed it at 7.44, you got a bonus 1% in that area. And of course, Chase was a very good athlete, so he hit that bonus in spades. Then again, as I mentioned, I was testing things like yards after catch ability and contested catch rate and 3-level ability and usage. So that's what you see here with the yak ability, yards after catch per reception, missed tackles forced per catch after the catch there as well. Both of those guys scored perfect in the yards after catch ability metric, which would shock none of us. If we watched them on film coming out of school, we knew that they were both very good yards after catch receivers. Then we look at 3-level grade. It was important to me that we didn't overrate these prospects that got a lot of checkdowns and a lot of screen passes, and we actually rewarded prospects like Ja'Marr Chase, who did most of their damage downfield, who got a lot of targets excluding screen passes. As you can see there, you can see he wasn't a slot receiver. He wasn't, and he was very productive on targets that were downfield. Both of these guys scoring tremendously in deep yards per target in their best seasons. Then we look at hands. Again, you wanted to see drop rate on the low side of things. You wanted to see career contested catch and best season contested catch rate on the high side of things. Ja'Marr Chase a little bit down in terms of the hands discussion, but CeeDee Lamb scoring out very well. And then finally, so we got the 40% analytics, the 25% traits. Then we get to the film percentage of this, which was 35% or 30%, depending on if they were pre-2021, which of course CeeDee Lamb was. You could see Ja'Marr Chase was a top 5 pick, so he nails draft capital. He was an elite PFF receiving grade his final year at LSU, so he was nailing that category as well, and I graded him as an elite top 10 talent coming out of school in 2021, hence why he had a perfect 35% film grade. And same goes for CeeDee Lamb. Of course, I did grade him coming out of school. 2020 was the first year I graded prospects, but I completely overhauled my prospect grading cycle in 2021, so I didn't even include CeeDee Lamb's film grade, but nonetheless, he still grades out very well in the film category, as I mentioned. But yeah, all that culminated into the two kings in the model, Ja'Marr Chase, CeeDee Lamb. And you might be wondering why it says league winner in terms of their prospect tier. And it also says smash beside rookie draft tier. But they were basically both 90% or better in terms of their overall grade. The prospect tier of league winner is based on that grade in the final part of the column there. You could see over 90% is what they graded out to be. On the screen is a chart of the various prospect tiers. All of them are fantasy related, of course. You have league winner prospects, wide receiver 1 upside prospects, wide receiver 2 upside prospects, wide receiver 3, flex play, dart throw, waiver wire, and fodder, which basically just means that they're not really useful at all. But I think this illustrates what we're going for, right? Because if we know that Ja'Marr Chase, for example, was a league winner prospect, we can see that there's only been 2 of them. It's a small sample size, but him and CeeDee Lamb have both hit. So if we see a league winner prospect in this class, we should probably assume that they're great prospects. And same goes for the hit rates of the other positions. Of course, they're going to have bigger sample sizes and more data to go off of. Again, this is going back since 2016. And of course, we only have year 1 to 3 production from 2021 class and before that, because the 2022 wide receiver class and 2023 wide receiver class have not played 3 years in the NFL yet. So I didn't include Garrett Wilson and Drake London and those type of guys in this sample because they still have 1 more year, and the 2023 wide receivers still have 2 more years to prove what their production value is. The other thing that you might have noticed, like I said, is the thing that said smash beside CeeDee Lamb and Ja'Marr Chase's name. And this basically is just a formula versus their draft capital. It basically spits out canned advice that say, if these were all 4 first-round wide receivers, which these guys are, Ja'Marr Chase, DJ Moore, Jahan Dotson, Kadarius Toney, were all drafted in round 1, you could see that Ja'Marr Chase gets the smash label as a prospect that was over 85% on the FSE prospect model. You could see that DJ Moore gets the solid label basically as a prospect that was in that 78 to 85% range. You get the bust potential label from Jahan Dotson, who is in the low 70s. You get the landmine grade basically for Kadarius Toney, who was under 70% as a first-round receiver. So again, this was linked to actually where they go in the draft because it's different for someone who was a 67% prospect who went on day 3 versus who went on day 1, because Kadarius Toney, 67% type of prospect, goes on day 1, is labeled as a landmine, whereas you could see here, Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown were both 60% prospects, but they went on day 3, so they get the label of sleeper instead of landmine because obviously you're not having to draft them as high in a rookie draft. So by now, I think you guys should understand how this thing works. Hopefully I didn't confuse anybody, but essentially this prospect model is out of 100%. 40% analytics, 25% traits, 30 to 35% of it being film, and you basically, all the metrics that you stacked up against, you got a grade for each individual metric that encompassed your prospect model grade in totality. So let's go through the 2024 wide receiver class, which is why you guys clicked on this video in the first place. Let's go round by round and analyze some of the wide receiver prospects in this 2024 class, and I'll highlight some of my biggest takeaways. I'm going to compare their prospect profiles too to other prospects that we've seen since 2016 to give you guys an idea of how good of a bet are we making on this guy? Because if you see that I compare prospect X to prospect Y, you might think, okay, was that guy a hit or miss? But the real takeaway here is how good of a prospect was that player? Regardless if they hit or missed at the next level, where were they going in rookie drafts? Did we feel good about those guys going into rookie drafts and that kind of thing? So let's start with the round 1 wide receiver prospects that went in the 2024 class. And let's start with the 2 guys that head out this prospect model, beating Ja'Marr Chase and CeeDee Lamb's previously high marks. Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers are the best prospects in the history of the model. So that's a huge takeaway right off the bat. The only real marks that these guys missed, Marvin Harrison missed a couple of the yards after catch stuff, just average in those areas. But everything else he nailed. And Malik Nabers actually really didn't miss a single thing in this prospect model, but the only difference between him and Marvin was that I had a higher film grade on Marvin Harrison Jr. So that's why Marvin Harrison leaped up to the top of the class here. But Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers, if you didn't know this already, these guys are elite wide receiver prospects. And according to the model, they're better wide receiver prospects than Ja'Marr Chase and CeeDee Lamb. I know we can't really contextualize that because we've seen those other 2 guys in the NFL. They're elite dynasty wide receivers. But as prospects, I feel like we're going to be looking back 5 years from now and realizing just how special these 2 guys were. And they both have the chance to be dynasty wide receiver 1 someday and very early on potentially in their career, given their draft capital, given the hype around them. Now, with that being said, Odunze is no slouch either. He stacked up as a top 6 wide receiver prospect since the year 2016, only missing the marks on the things we know about him, right? Age-adjusted stuff, being a senior coming out, breakout age, year out of high school, also some of the yards after catch stuff as well. Odunze is not quite to the level of Ja'Marr Chase and CeeDee Lamb and Marvin Harrison and Malik Nabers, but wide receiver 1 upside is a very prestigious group to be a part of nonetheless, and these guys peaked as top 5 dynasty wide receivers 60% of the time, going back to our hit rate chart, and they hit a wide receiver 1 season 66% of the time, and that's with guys like Garrett Wilson and Drake London, who still haven't even hit their ceilings yet. They're still young players in the NFL, so I wouldn't even be worried about Odunze. He compares very favorably to a guy like Drake London and to a guy like Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith, of course, being the guy that also had the senior, itis coming out, the guy that people weren't as excited about because of the breakout age and all that kind of stuff. But rest assured, man, Odunze is one of the better wide receiver prospects we've seen. He would absolutely have been the wide receiver 1 in many other draft classes. So if you guys are wondering, he's on the board at 106. 107, my rookie draft, just thank your lucky stars that you get shares of Odunze. He is, I think, my most drafted wide receiver prospect in this class based on the picks that I've had in the first couple rounds. So the next guy that we're going to talk about who also went in the first round is my wide receiver 4 in this class in Xavier Worthy. The only wide receiver 2 upside prospect that comes out of this class. Troy Franklin would have been there had he gone with day 2 draft capital, but of course he slid to day 3. Xavier Worthy's wide receiver shortcomings are well documented. He missed the boat for size. He missed the boat for contested catch rate. A percentage of his targets that came for screens. Of course, we know he was used in that way at the University of Texas. PFF receiving grade in his best season wasn't quite as good as, Odunze's or Nabers and those type of guys. But we do know things about Xavier Worthy is that he crushed the age-adjusted stuff as such a productive player very early on in his college career. Career production marks like yards per route run and targets per route run and target share and athleticism and his draft capital. And obviously post-draft, we know where he went now, so we know he went to a great landing spot for what he does well. One of the easiest clicks in terms of dynasty rookie drafts that I've ever seen, because all the guys that we're seeing him compared to, Marquise Brown, Jalen Waddle, Jordan Addison, were all top 10 rookie picks. They were all top 8, 7 rookie picks in most cases. You had to spend higher picks on these guys than you're spending on Xavier Worthy, and that just speaks to how good this class is, that you can get a prospect of the caliber of Xavier Worthy at 109, at 110, at 111, at 112 in some cases. So if you guys are wondering, hey, I'm at 111, should I hit the button on Xavier Worthy? The answer is absolutely yes, you should. Brian Thomas Jr., also a first-round wide receiver prospect in this class. The model is a little bit more wary of him, and this is kind of why I was wary on Brian Thomas throughout the entirety of this offseason, because we know what he does well. We know where he would hit the marks. If you've seen Brian Thomas Jr. play, you would know that he hits the marks for size. He hits the mark for athleticism. He hits the marks for draft capital and the fact that he was like a downfield 3-level usage wide receiver. We weren't getting a guy that was getting peppered screen passes. All of those targets were downfield, and he earned those. He missed the mark, though, on a lot of the production-related stuff. best season numbers, best season target share, yards per team pass attempt, receiving grade, market share related stuff, couple drops as well. So that's where Brian Thomas kind of stacks up as a little bit more of a sketchy prospect than some people are willing to admit. But again, there is a couple caveats with Brian Thomas. He obviously got bonus accelerators for playing with Malik Nabers and for playing in a Power 5 conference and for playing for a team that was, in the thick of it into the college football playoff race at the end of the season. So I've drafted him in one of my 6 rookie drafts so far, but I've been a little bit lower on Brian Thomas Jr. throughout this entire process, and I can't really imagine that I'm going to want too much more exposure to him than what I already have. You can see his best comparables are a hit and miss list here. You got QJ, you got Laquan Treadwell, who of course have been misses so far. QJ, of course, is still young, but that is a big-time miss so far. And then Brandon Ayuk, who is a little bit more of a boomer bust prospect himself, but he did turn into a stud, and of course, he's one of the best receivers in the league now. So is Brian Thomas more Ayuk, or is he more Quentin Johnston? Because the model suggests that he's about halfway in between the two guys, and Quentin Johnston hasn't hit so far in the NFL, but he did have a very good prospect profile for the most part. So with Brian Thomas Jr., again, you really have to decide which one do you think he is. Do you think he's Ayuk or do you think he's Quentin Johnston? Because the numbers suggest that he's going to be one of the two guys, and it might be both of them to some degree as well. So the round 1 landmines, the other guys that went in the first round, Xavier Legette and Ricky Pearsall, according to this model, are the worst wide receivers to be selected in round 1 since 2016. So these are all the landmine caliber prospects, and this is not a good list to be a part of if you have under a 70% FSE grade, with, again, the caveat that your grade is boosted by the fact that you were drafted in the first round because it factors into the grade. That's not good, right? Xavier Legette and Ricky Pearsall were reaches, according to this model. The nice thing is that pretty much every guy on this list that was also a landmine prospect, Jameson Williams, Henry Ruggs, Kadarius Toney, Jalen Reagor, Will Fuller, Calvin Ridley, they all went higher in their respected rookie drafts than where you actually have to select Xavier Legette and Ricky Pearsall. For the most part, you can get Xavier Legette and Ricky Pearsall somewhere between like 204 and 207 in rookie drafts, whereas like Jalen Reagor and Henry Ruggs and Jameson Williams, they were all bona fide first-round picks in their respective rookie drafts coming out. So proceed with caution with these guys. I like Xavier Legette specifically because my film grade was pretty good on him, but if he flames out, we should not be surprised. The data tells us that Xavier Legette should have been a second-round pick. He was a lot closer to DK Metcalf type of risk profile, and Carolina reached on him at the end of the first round, and same goes with Ricky Pearsall. He grades out a lot closer even to like a Roman Wilson type who went in the third round of this draft, and the 49ers reached on him in the first round. So those two guys, if you have a takeaway so far, these guys are landmine prospects. I mean, when you look at a flex play prospect, you're talking about a 29% chance that he hits inside the top 24 Dynasty wide receivers. And again, when you contextualize that he's going to be at an advantage being a first round pick, the market will sour on him quicker than they would on somebody else. And dart throw prospect, which is what Ricky Pearsall finds himself into, they only had a 15% chance of hitting inside the top 24 Dynasty wide receivers. So not a good list to be a part of. Those two guys, definitely proceed with caution. Let's move on here to the round 2 wide receivers, which we have Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, Jalen Polk, and Adonai Mitchell. With Ladd McConkey, he has a bit of a wonky profile. I know these guys don't have the same play style, but his prospect profile on paper looks a lot like Deebo Samuel's. You have two injury-riddled guys who were both great when they were on the field, but they missed a lot of time, and that affected their production metrics. That's essentially what Ladd McConkey and Deebo Samuel have in common, and also Ladd McConkey and his former Georgia teammate George Pickens had in common as well. The film, though, was the strong catalyst for both guys. When you look at Deebo Samuel, Ladd McConkey, they both had very good film grades. Same with Curtis Samuel as well. With Curtis Samuel, it was the fact that he was mainly just like a slot receiver and didn't have a whole lot of usage outside of like checkdowns and like heavy targets. And then with Deebo Samuel, it was more that he didn't quite have the prospect profile he should have had because he dealt with injuries. And then with McConkey, we know that he's a great athlete. He had good production when he was on the field, but he couldn't stay healthy. So that's kind of the bet you're making with Ladd McConkey, is that he's in this George Pickens, Deebo Samuel-ish range. And the good news is that that's kind of the range we're taking him in rookie drafts. George Pickens was a late first round, early second round rookie pick. Deebo Samuel, a late first round, early second round rookie pick. So it appears that the market is evaluating him appropriately, especially when you consider the fact that he did go to the Chargers, a really good landing spot for what he's going to be asked to do. So Keon Coleman also has a pretty strange prospect profile. Courtland Sutton appears to be the best comparable for him. He missed a lot of the production measures, Keon Coleman, because because, he didn't have a great career yards per route run, didn't have a great career best season target share and all that kind of stuff. But he did hit a lot of the marks in age-adjusted stuff, did hit a lot of the marks in terms of traits, because outside of his 40 time, he's an athletic dude and had good film traits that you saw show up in the numbers. And he had pretty good film, generally speaking, so my film grade was kind of high on him as well. So Keon Coleman, Cortland Sutton, as well as Juju Smith-Schuster are the names that popped for me with Keon, because he also kind of fit that mold, Juju coming out of USC, where the market share numbers weren't the greatest, but he did have good size, he did have good athletic traits, and he was drafted highly, and he had good age-adjusted stuff. It just wasn't like he was dominating USC's offense back in 2016 when he came out. So when you factor in all of these guys, again, were similarly ranked as like early second round rookie pick caliber guys when they came out, it makes sense. That's where you have to take Keon Coleman. Of course, he also went to a good landing spot going to the Buffalo Bills. So again, the goal of this is to determine, are these guys overrated, underrated, or valued appropriately? And it appears Ladd McConkey and Keon Coleman are valued appropriately on the market based on the bets that we're making on them. Jalen Polk and Adonai Mitchell are weird ones because it's great that they were round 2 picks and not round 1 picks. Otherwise, they'd probably be pushed up the board a little too much, and they would have been considered big reaches according to where they were drafted in the NFL. Jalen Polk's comp for me on film was Rashee Rice, and it's actually funny that his comp for me on paper is also Rashee Rice, because he kind of is solid across the board, with the best measure for his skill set being film, because you watch him and he's tough and he's got great hands, but like that kind of stuff doesn't really show up in the numbers because he misses a lot of the analytical benchmarks. He misses a lot of the age-adjusted benchmarks. And of course, we have more context that Jalen Polk was in an offense with other great wide receivers and Rashee Rice was alone at SMU. So I would say Jalen Polk being on par with Rashee Rice is actually a positive to Jalen Polk, because he was in an offense with a lot of great wide receivers and that kind of thing. So he's probably even a little bit better of a prospect than Rashee Rice was. Adonai Mitchell's kind of like the cheaper Brian Thomas Jr. bet in this class, because he's either going to be Terrace Marshall, which is one of his comparables here, or he's going to be DK Metcalf or George Pickens, because your guess is as good as mine. I look at Adonai Mitchell. I think he has some positive traits on film. I think he has some positive traits in his profile in terms of his athleticism and his usage and that kind of stuff. But he also misses the mark big time in terms of market share production and age-adjusted production and that kind of thing. He's a young player who's a great athlete, but that's really kind of where it starts and ends with him outside of his draft capital and his athleticism. I will say with both of these guys, Jalen Polk and Adonai Mitchell, in other years, you would have to take a prospect of this caliber in the early second round, even late first round of rookie drafts. And the nice thing is that both of these guys are well after the first 12 picks of ADP in rookie drafts in Superflex leagues. You're taking these guys anywhere between 203 to 208, which is great because this is where these guys belong, to be honest. And in most years, they would get pushed up the board due to lack of talent. So with those guys, again, not the greatest prospect profiles, but it is encouraging knowing that you're getting a good discount on their prospect profiles. The third round wide receivers, we have this gaggle of Malachi Corley, Jalen McMillan, Luke McCaffrey, Jermaine Burton, and Roman Wilson. With these guys, again, the hit rate of dart throw wide receiver prospects is not super high. It's a 15% chance that they peak as wide receiver 2s in Dynasty. In terms of production, it's a 5% chance that they ever have a wide receiver 1 season. So when we say dart throw, I mean don't draft them until the third round of your rookie draft, which is where all of these guys find themselves ranked for me. Malachi Corley, Jalen McMillan, Luke McCaffrey, Jermaine Burton, and Roman Wilson. For me, my favorite group, or my favorite guys in this group, are Malachi Corley and Jalen McMillan because they hit the more thresholds than the other guys, and they stack up similarly to some prospects that have hit, but most prospects that have not, right? You can see Tank Dell is a guy that found himself in this range last year, but you also see guys like Jalen Tolbert and Lynn Bowden and guys that are just not that good of prospects. That's kind of what you're getting here. You're either going to hit big like a Tank Dell, or you're going to get a guy that washes out of the league in a couple years. So with Malachi Corley, Jalen McMillan, Luke McCaffrey, Jermaine Burton, and Roman Wilson, this tier of wide receiver prospect, understand it for what it is. They're round 3 wide receivers in rookie drafts that you should be taking dart throws on. They're not solidified flex play type of wide receiver prospect. That is, I would say, one of the myths of this class is that there's 25 wide receivers that are going to be fantasy relevant. It's like, could these guys have their weeks? Could they be good in best ball here and there? Maybe, but I don't think that they're very likely to produce 3 or 4 of these wide receivers that are every week wide receiver 2s for your lineup. It's like maybe one of these guys hits. The good chance is that none of these guys become anything significant for fantasy purposes. So let's get into some like sleeper prospects that really popped on day 3. And Troy Franklin is literally the best day 3 wide receiver in the model's history. So if that's not a headline of this video, that you should be drafting Troy Franklin, I might put him on the thumbnail, to be honest. He nails the markers on pretty much every aspect you could possibly nail them on. Production, age-related things. He got better every single year of his college career, played in a Power 5 conference, was super productive, was super great, dominating his offensive production. He's a slightly better version of Tyler Johnson, according to the prospect model. And Tyler Johnson had some off-field work ethic concerns. So again, I think Troy Franklin being in this bucket with guys that have hit big like Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown, 2 top 8 dynasty wide receivers, is a good sign for Troy Franklin. I also stand by what I said about Troy Franklin pre-draft, because his prospect grade, even when you include the fact that Jameson Williams was a top 15 pick and Troy Franklin fell to round 4, his prospect grade is still higher than Jameson Williams. So that proves basically to me that Troy Franklin is a better version of Jameson Williams coming out. It's unfortunate that he fell to pick 102, which in some years would have been a 3rd round pick, and we might be thinking differently about Troy Franklin, but the model states this: Troy Franklin needs to be a high priority in your dynasty rookie drafts, and he was vastly underdrafted by the NFL. And again, remember what I said at the beginning of this video. This model has outproduced the NFL. It has predicted the outliers better than the NFL draft capital has done, and it has spotted the landmines and the sleepers better than NFL draft capital has done. So with Troy Franklin, he is number 1 priority for me as soon as I get into the late 2nd round of rookie drafts. That is the area of the draft that I am swinging for Troy Franklin, because I believe that he has a chance, because the dynasty community liked him coming in, to very quickly establish himself up the wide receiver ranks. He also, just from like a real life NFL perspective, went to a great landing spot with his college quarterback in a good offense with Sean Payton calling the shots. So I feel very good about Troy Franklin, and I'm drafting him aggressively. Probably my most drafted wide receiver in the 2nd round of any wide receiver prospect in this class. Javon Baker is also a premier sleeper as well. Had he gone on day 2, he would have been right on par with Brian Thomas Jr. and Ladd McConkey and Keon Coleman in terms of his overall grade, according to my model. So that should speak volumes really about how good of a projection Javon Baker is, given that you only have to spend a 3rd round pick on this guy. His range of outcome projections here are like Josh Reynolds, Khalil Shakir, but I do think that he has a higher ceiling than those guys because of his like alpha size and the fact that that team that he's on, the Patriots, don't really have a number 1 receiver. So I think Javon Baker could be really one of these 3rd round receivers that emerges as one of the best bets in dynasty rookie drafts. So if you're looking for guys to take in the 3rd round, if you're looking for guys to take in the 2nd round, Troy Franklin, Javon Baker, definitely guys that I really like. And then let's get into a guy that's traditionally a round 4 pick in Jacob Cowing. Late round analytics darling, similar to Cedric Wilson and James Prochet is kind of his projections here. Just hammer this dude in the late 4th round of rookie drafts. I know he has a uphill battle to climb and up the depth chart in San Francisco right now, but things could look a lot different in San Francisco 1 year from now. So Jacob Cowing, who knows, maybe he's the starting slot receiver for this team a year from now, and he gets a year to just play special teams, just work in on sub packages and that kind of thing. Jacob Cowing is a guy that I have hit the button on a lot in the 4th round of rookie drafts, because I want good receivers who attach to good offenses, and that's exactly what Jacob Cowing represents according to this model. Dart throw prospect, again, he is the same caliber of prospect, according to this model, as Ricky Pearsall, who went in the 1st round. So that is the type of discount you're getting on Jacob Cowing. That's the point of this prospect model, to contextualize just how good these guys are in relation to each other. So obviously we respect the draft capital with Pearsall, but at the same time, as a prospect, they compared pretty similarly in terms of that. So Johnny Wilson, also an interesting UDFA / 4th rounder to stash. A waiver wire prospect. Again, these guys don't really hit at a high rate. Talking about a 2% chance to be a peak wide receiver 2 in Dynasty, a 8% chance to ever have a top 36 wide receiver season. But with Johnny Wilson, he represents a solid bet because he's a pretty balanced prospect. He also compares favorably to a guy like Jawan Jennings, who has been productive, has been a solid flex play here and there. That's kind of the upside you're looking for with Johnny Wilson. And of course, he went to the Eagles, who are a good team. And again, I want good wide receiver prospects on good teams. And then finally, one other sleeper I want to talk about is Jalen Coker, who is the best wide receiver prospect who has ever gone undrafted, according to the model. Had he gotten drafted, he would have been a top 10 wide receiver prospect in this class, according to the model. So the fact that he pops over 10% higher than any of the UDFAs, Jacoby Myers, Alan Lazard, Tim Patrick, those type of guys, is impressive. So Jalen Coker, a priority UDFA prospect. You can see his grade in relation to Puka Nacua and Amon-Ra St. Brown's. It's literally higher, even despite the fact that he went undrafted. So Jalen Coker, a guy that after your rookie draft is over, I'm spending fab on him. I've gotten him in 3 or 4 leagues so far because I'm being aggressive with him, especially knowing that he went to Carolina, a team that is in need of wide receivers to step up. I do think Jalen Coker could carve out a role for himself. So the final thing I want to talk about in this video, I know I've gone a little bit long here. Hopefully everybody's still with me. I just wanted to outline the class in totality and in terms of how it stacked up to last year's class, in terms of how deep it was, the top heavy talent, and that kind of thing. This year's class had 12 wide receiver prospects that were flex plays or better. Of course, we had 2 league winner prospects who are widely considered high-end dynasty wide receivers already, Marvin Harrison, Malik Nabers. We also had a wide receiver 1 upside prospect in Odunze, who's a very good prospect. And then we had 21 dart throw or better prospects. I mean, we're looking at a pretty deep wide receiver class where in round 1, you want to be taking wide receivers of your rookie draft. In round 2 of your rookie draft, you want to be taking wide receivers. In round 3, you want to be taking wide receivers. That's just the way that this class works. And when we compare it to last year's class, we can see that only 11 wide receivers were flex plays or better, and no wide receiver 1 upside prospects, no league winner prospects. So that kind of shows contextually that this class was way better than last year's class, because according to this, Xavier Worthy, who was my wide receiver 4, would have been in conversation for wide receiver 1 in last year's class. Jackson Smith-Njigba and Jordan Addison taking home that crown. Odunze, who's my wide receiver 3, would have absolutely been my wide receiver 1 in last year's class. We can see some of these flex play caliber prospects. We actually have more of them in last year's class than we have in this year's class, and a lot of these guys ended up hitting, right? Puka Nacua, Rashee Rice, Josh Downs, Jaden Reed, a lot of those guys ended up hitting. So the depth of last year's class was a little bit underrated, and I wish I had this prospect model last year, but it's also worth noting that it did fall off a cliff after the first couple of guys there. And like I said, only 13 wide receivers were dart throws or better. A lot more dart throws this year. No, there's not really any Malachi Corleys and Javon Bakers in last year's class, whereas this year there was a lot more of those guys. So again, hopefully you guys got some value from this video. Hopefully everybody followed along and I wasn't too confusing for anybody. That is the unveiling of the FSE prospect model, everything from start to finish, how I built it to how it stacked up in this year's class. Hopefully I gave you guys some actionable advice to go out and target some players. Again, this video was called Wide Receivers to Target and Avoid. So obviously you're targeting Xavier Worthy. You're targeting some of these top-end guys, Jacob Cowing in round 4, Javon Baker, all these type of dudes, Troy Franklin. You're targeting all of those type of guys, and you want to maybe avoid the Xavier Legettes. You maybe want to avoid the Ricky Pearsalls, the Adonai Mitchells, maybe be cautious of a Brian Thomas Jr. and guys like that. So hopefully you got some value from this video. Leave a like down below if you did. Hit the subscribe button if you guys are new around here. And of course, if you want all of our Dynasty rookie rankings, if you want our top sleepers, our top values, our top fades, all of these prospects written up, graded, player cards, all that good stuff. Our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide is live now on flockfantasy.com. You can use the promo code FSE when you sign up for 30% off any of the packages, a 7-day free trial to see all the value on the site when you check it out. And of course, on the site, it's not just our Rookie Draft Guide. You also get our Dynasty rankings, our Dynasty trade value chart, our trade calculator, our My Teams feature where you can load in your teams and see how we would grade your teams relative to the rest of your teams in your league. Tons of value over on flockfantasy.com, including when I post the big reveal of the 2024 wide receiver prospect model on the site. It won't be quite up yet when you're watching this. It'll probably be about a couple days from now. But again, stay tuned for that. I will be posting that very, very soon. Hopefully by like the 10th of May, that'll be up whenever you guys are watching this. But again, hopefully you guys are having fun in your rookie drafts right now. Hopefully you got them going fast and furious. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.